everyone to In Layman's Terms with Guy Nohra. We take complex issues, we analyze them, interpret them, and then we come back with common sense and talk to you about them. And there is nothing more complex in the world today than what our next guest is going to be talking to us about. Marlin Stutzman from the great state of Indiana, Hoosier. By the way, Congressman, Corey Wood was my campaign manager when I was running for governor of Nevada.
Oh, is that right?
So I have a Hoosier connection.
Fantastic.
So we are going to talk today about Syria. And I know the congressman's time is very, very precious, so I don't want to take too much time on anything else but that subject. But Congressman, if you don't mind telling us about yourself, and then in your position, how you went out and went on this fact-finding mission. And I can't wait to hear how it went. I happen to be a very proud American. I became American at the age of 23. My parents emigrated to the United States from Lebanon when I was 15. I know the area, know the language, but I also am the proudest American I know, but that's because I don't know a lot of people.
Happy to do that. I grew up on a farm in Northeast Indiana. My mom and dad, were just hardworking Americans trying to make ends meet. Started their family very young, I'm the oldest of four, and my siblings and I, we grew up in the cornfields, detasseling corn and working hard on the farm. And so we learned a good work ethic early on in life. And then after 9/11 occurred, my wife and I had our first son, who was born 3 weeks before 9/11 happened. And that's when I decided that I wanted to get involved somehow to be sure that America was safe, that America was strong, and that my son had a safe place, a safe country to grow up in. And so I first ran for a state legislative seat, and then eventually ran for Congress after the whole Obamacare legislation passed, and we could talk about that all day long about what it hasn't done for the American people. And then so I served in the U.S. Congress from 2010 till 2017. I ran for the U.S. Senate, unsuccessful. But that gave me the opportunity to go back into the private sector and to work in business, which is something that I've always loved, is to build companies. We focus primarily on agriculture and manufacturing. But then I had the opportunity to run for the House seat again that Senator Jim Banks, now Senator Jim Banks, gave up. And so I'm back in Congress. But during that 8 years, I really got to experience the challenges and difficulties of being in the private sector, building a business, making payroll. We were in the restaurant space. We were in manufacturing, in transportation, agriculture. So really kind of the heart of the heartland in all of those businesses. But during my previous time in Congress, I went on a trip over to Saudi Arabia. I've always been fascinated with the Middle East. And of course, just the history that's there, the holy cities that are there. I grew up in a very strong Christian family, and of course, reading the Bible and hearing the Sunday school stories over time of Damascus and Jerusalem, and of course the Israelites traveling around the Middle East, Egypt. So when I went over in 2014, the trip was more about the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. In fact, 9/11 wasn't too far in our rearview mirror. And we talked about the business relationships and, of course, the fact that a lot of the terrorists on 9/11 were training in Saudi Arabia. So fast forward, I met a friend on that trip who is a Syrian American, and we stayed in touch. He's from Chicago, and after I was reelected in 2024, I have a pretty good size American Syrian population that lives in Indiana, and an organization called Syrian American Alliance for Peace and Prosperity approached me about lifting the sanctions now that Assad had been pushed out of office, pushed out of the country, which was a wonderful thing for the Syrian people. So I said, you know what, I need to know more. I want to understand more, especially if I'm going to, advocate the Trump administration for lifting the sanctions. This is a big decision to be made. And of course, President Trump, I believe, is the greatest negotiator, strongest diplomat that we have in the United States since Ronald Reagan was president. And so they said, well, would you ever take the trip to Syria if the opportunity arose? And I said, you know what, I would consider it. Well, 2 weeks later, I was given that opportunity. And so myself and Congressman Corey Mills from Florida went on an unofficial trip over to Syria. And I'll just, I'll point to the first experience that I had is when we landed, we flew over on Turkish Airways. We flew into Istanbul and then we flew into Damascus. And the plane, when we touched down in Damascus, the plane just erupted into applause from the passengers. There were grown men crying on the plane because they were back in their homeland, a land that they love and a land that they hadn't been to for anywhere between 15 to 20 years for some of them. And so for them to be back in their home country was a very emotional experience for them. And so I was so grateful for the opportunity to go because I got to see the devastation and destruction that the Assad regime left in Syria. The fact that this man, was so just brutal and terrorized his own people. Some people call it a civil war in Syria. It's not a civil war. It was a war on his own people. It was a political genocide. It wasn't over religion. It wasn't over race. It was simply if you disagreed with the Assad regime, he would kill you. If he would put you in prison. So to see what the Syrian people have been through over the last 14 years was truly incredible, and to see how strong the Syrian people are, what they've been through. But the fact that if you ever meet a Syrian outside of Syria, they're either a doctor or a business person. They're so smart and talented. And that was one of the things that I walked away with, is how they just have this incredible fortitude to keep marching forward no matter what the circumstances. But this is an incredible opportunity. And that's why I went, was you don't get rid of a dictator without a shot being fired, no less. There wasn't a war. What al Sharaa did coming into Damascus and pushing Assad out was really incredible, that there wasn't a war over this. But to see what al Sharaa is trying to do in building the government, rebuilding Syria, I left believing that this is an opportunity that the United States needed to engage in a dialogue with the Syrian government.
I love the story. First of all, I want to tell you that I love entrepreneurs and I love business people, because as a venture capitalist, that's what I did my whole career. So the fact that you did 8 years back in the business sector, and as we always say, signing the back of a check is what when you become someone in government who's important like yourself, at least you understand how regular folks think and what they have to go through.
Yes.
So Syria. I'm gonna do a little devil's advocate here, because you've been there. So what some of the people I speak with will tell me, this guy was with Daesh, he was with Al Qaeda, he trimmed his beard, and now he's he wants to open it up. Were you able to get behind that and get perhaps through some of this bias, I guess, maybe that some people have?
Well, Guy, as you know, I mean, especially in business, when you do negotiations and deal making, almost on a daily basis, you're trying to size the person up on the other side of the table, and you're looking at their eyes, you're looking at their body language, you're hearing what they're saying. And then at the end of the day, it's their actions speak louder than anything. But there has to be, there's a saying in business that we move at the speed of trust. And that's really what's needing to happen here, is that we're going to move at the speed of trust. And that's why I wanted to go as a business guy. Corey is a military man, so he got to approach him as someone that served in our military. I got to approach him and talk about what's his vision for commerce and trade and business in Syria, because ultimately it's about the Syrian people and helping the Syrian people to be able to rebuild their lives. But I got to meet with al Sharaa for about an hour and 15 minutes. And it was later in the evening when we met there at the palace that Assad had built. There were several things, just little things that I think are always make a difference. And what I heard was, I asked him, I said, because they're working long hours. I said, do you sleep here in the palace? And they were like, absolutely not. This is not where I live. This is not, this is the people's palace. And so he recognizes that this is not his palace. It's the people's palace. He's opened it up for the general public to even visit from time to time at different events. He talked about trade and commerce. He got excited about that. Even though it was 10 o'clock in the evening when we met there in his office, we were speaking through an interpreter, but you could see he got excited about the fact that he knew the location of Syria is integral to that region and the amount of trade, and it's an international intersection where he was talking about building rail lines across Syria. He was talking about truck lines, commerce, and the fact that he said, with rail, they could cut off 10 days of shipping by ship if they cut across Syria and there in the Gulf states. He had a real plan, and then also tourism. I told him, I said, as a Christian, I said, there would be millions of people that would love to visit Jerusalem, visit Damascus, and visiting other parts of the Middle East. That the economic impact would be huge. I felt comfortable talking to him. He's 42 years old. My hope and my prayer is that he sees what the Qataris are doing in building up a country, the Saudis, the UAE, and other countries, with all of the oil revenue there and the other industries that they're building, that he would think to himself, that's what he should be doing in Syria. I encouraged him to do that by building a country rather than tearing it down. I thought President Trump made an incredible comment yesterday in his remarks. He said, commerce over chaos and technology rather than terrorism. That's what should be focused on. And I believe that's the direction that al Sharaa is going. But the people that really helped me also feel better about supporting lifting the sanctions were his cabinet ministers. I met with several of them. One was a Christian female who was the minister of nonprofits, and she was so fun to visit. We went into the old city of Damascus and we toured around the city there. She was traveling with us. She was remarkable. And then also I met with the Minister of Commerce and Technology. He had actually fled Syria and took his family to the UAE under the Assad regime. But he told me, he said he was not going to bring his family back until Syria stabilized. But he said after a half dozen phone calls from al Sharaa to come serve in his government, that he finally felt he needed to visit him. And he said after his several conversations, he felt comfortable wanting to be a part of al Sharaa's administration and the government. One of the other things, too, that I thought was important, because I relayed to President al Sharaa the importance of the relationship between the United States and Israel. And, he said that he was open to the relationship with Israel, and he's even open to the Abraham Accords, which would be a huge benefit to Syria and to the Gulf region. But one of his top criteria is that Syria not be split up into sections. He said he wanted to keep Syria united. He wanted to keep Syria under a nationalist government, not a sectarian government, but that they would be Syrian Alawites or Syrian Muslims or Syrian Christians. Unifying under a Syrian flag was really important to him, and keeping the country unified is how he felt that the government needed to go and the country needed to go. So there were a lot of different comments that we had and throughout our conversation. But after I left, I felt comfortable that I believe that we needed to engage with this government in Syria to give it an opportunity, give it the chance to rebuild and help the Syrian people.
Well, it makes me feel good that what you said about being when you're a business person, you're constantly sizing people up. So that's and you brought up in part of the discussion, and I was going to ask you this next question, which is minorities in Syria. So
Yep.
what the Assads were brilliant at was they claimed to all the minorities that we take care of you against the Sunni wave because we're here,
Yeah.
and a lot of people bought into that. But I, as someone who knows the region, again, I am concerned about the minorities, whether it's the Druze or the Kurds up in the north and the Druze in the south, and sadly the remaining Christians, which is a very small number. They're all
Yeah.
here. They're all here in Chicago, being engineers and architects, and
Right.
being great citizens.
Yep.
And of course, the Alawis, who one could imagine that's a complex one, right? Because how many
Right.
of them were Basharis, if you like, or Assadis, and how many of them were not, and then how do you integrate everybody? So I'm glad you actually had that conversation. And so did the question of federations come up, or was it just one country for all? And
No, we talked about, the different, cultures and sects and backgrounds. I mean, it's very similar to the United States. I mean, we have people from all over the world that live in the United States. And, but, that's why it's so important to be American first. Not to forget about our cultural heritage or where we came from. In fact, I think it's critical that we always remember our roots, where we came from. But America is a great country because we've been able to mesh together and work for these ideals. And that's what I, shared with President al Sharaa, is that, he has an opportunity to be, a hero, a regional hero, if he can unify the country, respecting all backgrounds, human rights, religious rights, women's rights, and after talking with folks in the Christian community, talking with folks in the Muslim community, there was a sense of optimism that that's the direction he was going. Now, there has to be accountability, and this is where I think it's really on President al Sharaa to be vulnerable and be willing to open up the country to investigations. There was a bunch of Alawites that were murdered up in the coastal region. There were Druze that were killed in one of the cities in the south. By having outside parties being part of the investigation, I think is really important, because we're still rebuilding trust. And as you mentioned, the Alawis are in an awkward position. Because of Bashir Assad, and so they're concerned: are they going to be, tortured or ostracized because of Assad's actions? But one of the things that President al Sharaa talked about, and I think this was important, and it's a tough line to walk. He even said that this is a tough line to navigate. Is there has to be forgiveness of the past, but there also has to be transitional justice for what has happened as well. So you can't just say we're going to forget everything that's happened. If there are still people in the country that were murderers, that were thieves, took people's livelihoods, there has to be accountability.
They had a famous intelligence. They had these. Remember, they had this kind of militia of thugs that went around. Yep. I forget their name now, but it was definitely so. Yeah, it's kind of a de-Ba'athification process, as we did denazification, because there were also Sunnis and Christians on the Assad side for years and years. They always hit, Khaddam, who was his prime minister, minister of foreign affairs, of the dad, was a Sunni who obviously was part of a very barbaric regime. So somehow the de-Ba'athification has to take place, and hopefully we as the West, but we as the United States, will not repeat some of the mistakes we saw in Iraq.
Yes.
As we were doing this. So it's kind of how will you monitor that? Because I agree, it's trust and verify with the president.
Well, I think, again, it comes back to the Trump administration. If we were still under the Biden administration, my confidence would be not very high. I mean, because they're just, and this was interesting too, Guy, that I heard over and over from the Syrians. They were not fans of President Obama at all, because every time President Obama would put in a red line, Assad crossed it, and there were no consequences. And that's one of the things that President Trump has done is when he says he's going to do something, people know he's going to do it. And if you want to be a friend to President Trump, he'll be a friend back. As long as you do what you say you're going to do, he does what he says he's going to do. But if you want to be an enemy, or if you want to put yourself at odds with President Trump, watch out. And that's why he got such a great reception in Riyadh yesterday, is because they know they can trust him. They know he'll do what he says he's going to do, and that there will be consequences if you cross the American people and you cross the Trump administration. But I think Trump's administration is so talented and so strong. I've met with Morgan Ortagus and others that are doing a lot of work in the Middle East, and I think that those voices and that experience that he has around him will help. Marco Rubio, strong Secretary of State, is going to be very plugged in, because, like I said, we only have these opportunities, maybe once a generation or more, to be able to transition from a dictatorship. I don't know that we say it has to be a democracy, because that part of the world may not understand American democracy, but we want to move towards where people have freedom and opportunity, and hopefully President al Sharaa wants to move that direction as well.
And so they can feel safe, and that they can have their families there. It's funny, you were mentioning the Obama administration. ISIS was the JV team. Remember?
Yep.
I remember that comment. And of course, the previous administration, they're always embarrassed of American power, and hence they do nothing. Which I see is absolutely the opposite here. You have a man who to us has already made promises and kept them, and then as long as they over there, they make promises, and he makes promises, and he will keep them. And if they don't, then that's their big problem. Syria is fascinating. How quickly that tiger crumbled, right? If it wasn't for Iran, Hezbollah, and the Russians, who were busy somewhere else, they would still be around. That's the other thing too. I don't know how quickly the way they moved, and the army didn't fight, and then they changed sides. And so did you get any vision into that? How it was so easy after many years of very strong civil war and resistance and.
Well, and I shared this with the group that I was with, and also the president, that, to some extent, we owe a debt of gratitude to the Ukrainians. The fact that they have held Putin off and have kept him, busy, trying to his war on the Ukrainian people. But that has weakened Assad, because Putin didn't have the ability to support Assad, and he's, retracting a bit. So, that's something I think that we, in the West should all recognize. Obviously, that's a whole other discussion about funding for Ukraine and the government, and the war with Ukraine. But I think that's something that needs to be recognized, that the Ukrainians have done an incredible job of fighting back against Putin, who is a thug. But that has weakened Assad, and with the other thing too, I forgot, Guy, I wanted to share with you, is that a lot of the Syrian people, we saw this even in Damascus, there were signs around the city that said "Make Syria Great Again," and so they love President Trump. But it goes back to 2018 when the Russians, and they were going to kill a bunch of people up in Idlib, and because they were going after terrorists. And there was a lady that was able to get to President Trump at that time, and really went to bat and said, look, you're going to kill thousands and thousands of civilians, including her own family. And Trump put a stop to that. And so the Syrians remember that. And they've always believed that President Trump had their back. And so knowing that the Syrian people are supportive of Trump, I think also goes a long way.
So I have to tell you an anecdote, but before I do that, I was going to tell you quickly, we can't forget our Israeli friends for destroying Hezbollah, which was
Yeah.
really the Radwan Brigade did a lot of work for the Assad regime, and of course they were also out of the picture, so that was very helpful.
Yeah.
So and again, they helped in that process. But so the anecdote, and how much time do we have? I want to make sure I respect your time.
Yeah, I think how much time do we have, Ron? Few more minutes, he says.
Okay, it's going to be a very fast anecdote then. Okay, so you said how the Syrian people love President Trump. So, as you know, in that part of the world, when you have a son, you are called Abu and the first name of the son. So, if you were the first son of your dad would be called Abu Marlin. So, the
Okay.
father of Marlin. It's always the first male son. Well,
Okay.
for some reason in Syria in 18, when they were having their love affair with President Trump, they would call him Abu Ivanka, right? It wasn't Abu Eric. For some reason, right? And he became famous as Abu Ivanka, and they love. I mean, again, they really did like him back then because of what you said, the whole Idlib
Yeah.
story. So I
Yeah.
always thought that was the funniest anecdote because it was, from that culture, the first male born is absolutely
Oh,
it's the
yeah.
whole world. But yet here we were, Abu Ivanka. So I thought that was hilarious.
Well, she's quite popular in her own right. So,
So so I'm so, first of all, I would love to meet you again. We have friends in common, and Corey and Ascent and all these guys. Thank you so much for the work you do on behalf of our country, on behalf of our president, and of course, Hoosiers. And I always thought when I was running for governor that your state was one of the best run, and I was going to emulate a lot of the things you were doing.
uh,
Amazing state with amazing people. And I'd love to sometime meet you in person, and we can have some more discussions.
I would love to do that. You mentioned common sense at the beginning of the episode, and I've got a sign in my foyer in my office in Washington that says "Bring back common sense," and I think that President Trump has done that, and he's really the leader that the United States we needed for a long time, and he's got a backbone, and but he loves people. That's one thing that I really admire about him. He loves people, and he wants to see people be happy and prosperous. But he doesn't like people that are bad people. And so the Iranians would do really well right now to be at the table and really get their act together, because the Iranian people, therefore, they had a chance, but they weren't able to topple the regime. But I don't know that that'll happen. But you know what? If there's anybody that can do it, President Trump is really bringing peace to the Middle East when so many people were, all of us were probably to some extent wondering if it could ever happen.
Well, there's a famous expression, oh yeah, I'm going to bring peace to the Middle East, which means a impossible mission. So with the president and his work and what you have been doing and this administration, all of us are lucky and thankful. And yeah, this has been great, and I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, and again, I really hope to see you and meet you again.
Let's make it happen. Thank you
Okay,
so much. It's great to
thank
visit
you.
with you.
I hope this was as helpful as I felt it was to me. So Syria is this incredibly complex place, and you've all seen there's been a civil war there for the last 14 years. The regime was actually held together by the Russians and the Iranians, which both had bigger fish to fry, and Hezbollah, of course, which is an Iranian proxy. So the regime fell very quickly. Our hope is that the group that is in charge now, whom the congressman was talking about, is actually going to uh, do what they say they're going to do, because it's very complicated over there, and there are years and hundreds of years of history and of distrust and fear amongst the groups. So I do believe that with American oversight, along with our allies in that part of the world, UAE, Saudi, etc., there's probably hope for the Syrian people. At the end of the day, everything we do is about people. We care about individuals and their families and being able to raise them and live a good life. So I'm so impressed that the congressman actually flew. It's not a safe place yet. That he and Congressman Mills flew there and had these discussions. So I'm encouraged. I understand the magnitude and the complication of the task in that part of the world, but I think these are good first steps. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. We went short because Congressman is a busy man, and we look forward to talking to you next time on the In Layman Terms with Guy Nohra. Thank you.